My day job is messing around with cities, and I've been doing it for quite a few years. And over that period, what I've learned is there's two different things that happen with cities. First of all, they're not accidents, they happen because of people. But there's two very different processes that happen. So this sort of process here is what I would think of as being organic. It's messy, it's irregular, it happens over time by individuals collaborating. There's a different sort of process which also can be beautiful, which is this one, but it's very different, which is where there's an imposed order on a city, and this doesn't happen at the same sort of scale. It happens at a much larger scale, and it can only happen when you've got an organization, a royalty, a government, a corporation, that can shape a city to that extent. The reason I'm sort of giving you these sort of two poles is because I talk about Birmingham. And for me, Birmingham has always been the first sort of city. It's been organic. It grew not because of a royalty. We never had a royal family that lived here. But what we did from the beginning was grow incrementally through small businesses, creative companies, to the point that by about 1800, we were the most important manufacturing city in the world. And by 1900, our population had grown 30-fold over 2 generations. And so it was astonishing. It was a big, powerful city. But like powerful cities often do, London at the moment, it starts to trip out. It starts to get health problems, overcrowding problems. So what was really, I think, interesting about Birmingham in 1900s was what Joseph Chamberlain did. He did some planning, but it was really sophisticated keyhole surgery to the city. It didn't tamper with that sort of innate quality of the ecosystem that was there, that was manufacturing and small businesses and small scale. What he did, he irrigated it with water, power systems, education, culture, and so transformed the city without destroying it. And I think there's a great lesson in that for what we need to do today. What then came along, and what we see evidence of today, is urbanists and planners never waste a good crisis. You'll notice that. So the Second World War was too good an opportunity to miss. That's a map of what happened to Birmingham. The red dots are high explosive, the black ones incendiary. And what happened was the government then, for the first time, we got to grips with doing big planning of Birmingham like we've never done before. So that coral reef structure, that delicate structure, that ecosystem got chiseled out. And what we did is we stretched it, we pulled it around for motor cars to the point that people got completely separated from the fabric of the city. And that sort of carving out of that motorway system did two things. It dislocated people from cars and from moving around the city, but it also made the city so unattractive that it almost collapsed. And combined that with the failure of the motor industry in the 1970s, Birmingham got to the nearest point towards death that any city has got to, probably apart from Detroit. Birmingham City Council then did a really interesting thing, is they repurposed the city in the 1980s around culture, business, different type of businesses, non-manufacturing, so service economy, and then sort of also had this plan of turning it into a pedestrian city where we reconnect parts of the city. So since I've been in the city, one of the things I've been involved with is how you then reconnect and glue back the city to the shape it used to be, going from 80 hectares back up to 800 hectares. And that's pretty much where we've got to today. We're on this sort of journey of reconnecting and repairing the city fabric. But just stepping outside of Birmingham for a moment and looking at the wider context, what you start to see when you look at what the world's doing is two things are happening. One is that the population of the world is getting more urban. 70% of the population now are urban, they're not rural. And this is where I show my age. When I was born, in the first circle, there was only 3 billion people on the planet. Today, there's over 7.5. If I live to my normal life expectancy, it'll be 9 billion. That's in my lifetime, a 3-fold increase in world population. That's never happened before. Never happened. So what are the implications of that on cities? Cities are facing a really tough job at the moment because they're having to deal with a lot more people, and also with climate change, there's more pressures on cities than ever before. So there's two options, two outcomes for how cities can accommodate that growth. Here's a slide that shows two opportunities. One is, by the way, these are at scale, these drawings. The one on the left is Atlanta, which has got pretty much the same population as the one on the right, Barcelona. The difference is Huge. Look how much space Atlanta takes up. Now, when I started my career, there was still rumblings that suburban, loose, separated communities with access to greenery was the right thing to do. I think pretty much now we've swung round and come full circle. What we now realize is there's all sorts of problems with low density, huge problems with low density. First of all, it uses lots of fuel. You need a car to go everywhere. The second one is that it socially disconnects people from other people. That's the only graph I'm going to show today, you'll be relieved to hear, but what it shows, it's only just been published, and the vertical scale is your waist circumference in centimeters, and along the bottom is residential density. So what it proves is actually the further you push people apart, up to a point, the further they are living apart from each other, from shops and from the city and from the city core, the more unhealthy and obese they can become, because it's very simple. There's more reliance on cars, and so people don't walk and cycle in the same way. So it would, of course, be a massive oversimplification to say dense is good, low density is bad. And there's certain densities we don't want to go anywhere near. But when you start, and that's another density that I don't think would be anywhere near what we should be aspiring to, because it causes huge amounts of waste. But the sort of densities that I'm interested in are these sort of Goldilocks densities. Now look at how it said that's about 7,000 people per kilometer. 10. New York's 10, almost 11. And then what's really surprising is Barcelona's a lot lower, but actually more dense. So just coming back to Birmingham, what is our density at the moment? Well, that's what it is. It's half of Copenhagen. It's getting on for a third of New York. And actually, if you, on your journey in here and your journey out, you can see why. It's not because actually our buildings are too low. We've just got too much space between the buildings. And what my sort of suggestion is that what we ought to be heading towards is redensifying the city, but also taking advantage of something that we haven't lost in visioning our future, which is this DNA of the city, which is still about innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, is what drove the city forward. I still experience it in spades. This is a great city. So I think the opportunity for the city is how you harness both of those things together. The capacity to become denser, more interesting, coupled with that creative drive. So I think there's sort of three things that I would urge people who've got a hand in shaping the city, which includes everyone in this room, to do. And one is to think about what that density thing is. Dense, because I'm an architect, maybe people think I just want to put more buildings on every site and fill up every site. That's not actually the case. I also not a fan of hugely tall buildings because they create all sorts of problems at low level. But density can be amazing, and especially when it's dense and messy. Messy's great. I'd imagine 19th century Birmingham was very messy, that people would live, work, play in the same buildings. We don't necessarily have the opportunity to that because we're regulated. I think the other one is big and small. We get lots of big planning. We've got the big city plan, we've got the big railway set, HS2, we've always done big things very well in Birmingham. Even HS1, the canal system was pretty good. But I do think that this small thing is so important. In what I do, it's so important. By small, it's the granular, messy stuff that you can't really plan, but actually makes a city worth living in, going to. So what are the sort of things that are small that would make a difference? Well, whilst we've got sort of the big city plan, I think we critically need a cycle network, which means it's safe to move around the city. The other thing I think we need to do is to stop regulating people who occupy a house or a small building and saying you can only live in it, you can't work in it, you certainly can't have a party in it. I mean, there's an amount of regulation that we face in this country which we don't realize exists. You look at other cities and they don't do that. I mean, I think you do need planning to stop huge bad things happening, but my goodness, when you get to small scale, just let it happen. We need to deregulate. The other thing, just on that big and small thing, I will say one thing, and this is a trade secret. Doing big stuff is easy. Big master plans, big buildings are a lot easier. Small stuff, to get that sort of granular, interesting, messy stuff to happen is far more tricky. And that's why it's very hard to achieve. But when it does, it makes a bigger impact on the city. The third one is this thing called leadership, and I'm not going to call it government, I'm not going to call it local authorities, because leadership is bigger than any of that. And it's the hottest topic in what I'm doing at the moment. Nobody's really having a heated debate about the shape of cities or whether they're going to get bigger. That's inevitable. What is a hot topic is who shapes them and what sort of governance we have. And I've got a few thoughts on that. One is, to get the best out of cities in the future, I think we need more agile ways of decision making. At the moment, you talk to a planner from any local authority quietly, and they'll tell you how dull and slow and miserable the planning process is. Because it's about legislation, it's about stopping things happening. What is great, and I think we should do more of this, is be agile and have a vision and lead things rather than controlling them. The other one is open. I think the best governments and the best organizations of cities, such as Amsterdam, Vancouver, engage universities, citizens, businesses, and so they work to the power of those other businesses and they multiply their capacity because they're not doing it on their own. The other thing is, despite mobile phones, despite our ability to text and communicate immediately to the people running this thing today, we seem prevented or impossible to affect planning in the same way. We should be able to do that. And then the third one is brave. I think our leadership, whoever it is, and it will include us, needs to be braver in doing two things. One is being brave enough to set a long-distance course for where our cities ought to go. A really bold vision, and be brave about saying we want to be carbon zero, we want to do this, and have some ambition about what we're going to do with our cities. Without ambition, we wouldn't do anything. Chamberlain had ambition. The other thing we need to do is be brave enough not to control, is embrace uncertainty, because our cities are getting too big to try and manage them like an unruly child. I think what we've got to do is actually let the city actually get its own momentum and energy. So just bringing all that to some sort of conclusion, really, going back to the first point, what is the right balance between planned and unplanned, between the organic and the master plan? Well, I think our cities are certainly going to get, over the next 30 years, a lot more complex, a lot more interesting. And so to sort of impose 1940s rigid planning on them seems to be completely the wrong thing to do. My recommendation is that what we would do is have clear direction of travel, at the same time deregulate and release the potential of cities by not actually trying to cage energy, but to release the potential within cities. And so, just to finish off, I mean, people say, what are your favorite cities, Glenn? And I think, I'm not going to name any of my favorite cities because we're in one, but my favorite cities exhibit these things. They're all, when you go into a great city, you can tell it's alive. There's something about the connection between the people and the place, which means it's vibrant, it feels alive. I think the second thing about great cities is they are not perfect, yeah? This idea that you've got this perfect utopian city is never going to happen. And so the other thing I like about cities is they are never finished. Thank you very much.